Once again, we are May and Kuku, and we are here to talk more about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But this time, it's going to be a little bit less about the show, some plot stuff and character stuff, but a lot of the conversation will be driven by the reactions people are having to the show, and specifically the racist reactions a lot of people are talking about, comments and people jumping through hoops to make arguments for white characters and all that jazz. So Kuku, do you want to start with how, like, your feelings on other people's feelings and what you've been engaging with about the show?
About other people's feelings. That's the best way to put it. Um, yeah, I mean, we weren't planning on making this video initially because I didn't think it was necessary to do a video after every episode. But this past episode, I think, sparked a lot of conversations because it was very intense. A lot of stuff happened. We're getting into the meat of like John Walker's true colors showing, and which obviously they were building up to that, but you know, we really started to see in full representation his complete awfulness as a human being. And on top of that, you know, we got the Dora Milaje, we got a lot of racial commentary throughout this show. So the last episode wasn't unique in that regard. But I think, you know, after spending some time, you know, watching other people's commentaries about the shows, and I was, you know, spending time reading people's comments and stuff, and that's where my feelings were like, because I didn't honestly do that for the first 3 episodes because I binge watched the first 3 episodes all at once, so I wasn't following the commentary after each episode. I just started to do that. But yeah, the number, it's just astonishing to me, the number of people who, let's not even like getting into like the details of like I mean, you could, if you go, you know, in details and break things down, you could have a debate about what the messaging is in the certain things and what they're trying to say, what they're not trying to blah, 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 blah. But there are people who just overall are trying to make the argument that this show is not about race. And that in and of itself is mind-boggling, because I'm like, are we watching the same show? Like, how could anybody watch that show and think that race is not a main plot point or conversation? Because it's not like they're being subtle about it. Like, they're being very blatantly hitting you over the head, like to the point where it's annoying, because I don't like shows that hit you over the head with any sort of commentary. To me, it always gets on my nerves, even when I agree with the commentary. I don't like when it's like so just like beating you over the top of the head with it. And to the point where like I had this image in my mind of like the Captain America shield, like what they're doing is taking that shield and just like bashing you over the head with the racial commentary, to the point where you're like, okay, I get it. But because I'm a believer in being more subtle and nuanced and intelligent and how you like navigate conversations and stuff where you don't need to do that. But even when it's so blatantly obvious, there's such a large portion of the audience that doesn't see it clearly. So I'm like, it's funny because I took a step back after you know, there were like comments that because we sort of were talking about this in the last video that we made, which if you haven't watched it, go back and watch our first video where we talked about Falcon and Winter Soldier and our initial thoughts about it. And we kind of like started to talk about like the fact that we didn't feel like the race topic was being handled in the best way that we felt like it could. And I was also like, you know, saying that there are certain things that I'm not really sure what they were trying to say or what they weren't trying to say or whatever. But you pointed out basically that this is a show that is for a white audience. And and I think it's like, if you look at it from the lens of it being a show by white people for white people, then it makes a lot more sense that they're hitting you over the head with crap, because clearly a lot of white people are still not getting it. Because for us, we're like, okay, well, it's not necessary to do that because we understand the implications of things and we understand things like metaphors and like, you know, but apparently for some people, unless someone is flat out saying the word racism, or whatever, they don't seem to understand what the implications are. Even though there's like a whole number of Black people in the show that are being shown in a variety of different ways and whatever. But it's like all of the stereotypical comments that people make when they're trying to argue against something being race related are coming out in a lot of people, and you're just, it really is just very mind-boggling and very emotionally exhausting to be like, why does this even need to, you wouldn't think that it needed to be a conversation. You would think that we would be able to sit here and have a delicate, interesting, nuanced conversation about what is going on and what isn't going on, and instead we have to have conversations like, oh, you know, is this show commenting about race at all? Yes, they did it in a bajillion different ways, like almost other second. It's conversations like, oh, is John Walker a racist? That's just like, why is that what people are focusing on? Like, and just and any Black person who's being overly critical of John Walker is being assumed to say that John Walker is a racist. And then people who are still, there are still people who make arguments like someone can't be racist if they have a Black friend or if they have a Black girlfriend, or it's just like, we have not come very far as a society if people are still making those arguments and people still have to explain to them why that's not how racism works. So it's just, all of it is just like emotionally, and the fact that people are defending John Walker's actions in any way at all whatsoever is just also a bit mind-boggling, because he's the most despicable character on the face of the earth. Like, I have not hated
And
a
it's
character.
funny because there's no question about his despicability. Really, you know?
Yeah, it's like, why is that a point of contention? They made it pretty obvious he's supposed to be despicable.
Right.
He's not supposed to be like, yes, they spent like 5 minutes trying to make him a sympathetic character by throwing in that part of where he's talking to his wife and friend about wanting to do the right thing and wanting to live up to the Captain America mantle, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, in that sense, they gave, and by giving him a Black friend, you know, and again, that scene where they introduce him is like so over the top with the whole like throwing him around so many Black people. It's like he has a Black friend supporting him and then the Black wife, and then he goes out and there's a Black band who's playing and there's some Black people in the audience who are like, it's like so over the top that is, and people are taking that as like, oh, that means that he's not racist, and it's just like, no, that means that he's not racist. It's just the fact that like, and that was part of why I was irritated with why they were throwing up so many Black people around him, because I think I knew that that would be misconstrued in a lot of people's minds, and I was just like, this makes it look like he has the approval of Black people, when it's like, there's no way that Black people like this person. There's no way that a genuine human with emotions can like this person. Like, I don't, it's not even like a Black-white thing. Like, he's just an all-around, just not likable human being, because he's constantly going around being completely rude and condescending to the people around him, especially the people of color around him, except for his special Black friend. But other than that, he's treating everybody like crap, and it's the fact that anybody can find justifiable reasons for his actions is just shows you that clearly there's a lot of John Walkers walking around in America. So
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that they need to defend him, those John Walkers in real life. They need to defend him to feel good about themselves. Like, I'm not racist, you know, because John Walker is a sympathetic dude. And you know what's interesting about that is because the show was trying to be somewhat nuanced about it. Like, it's not like John Walker isn't aware that he did some terrible shit. Excuse me. For those listening, I don't know if this is a PG show or not.
it's supposed to be, but I feel like it comes. It's in these sort of conversations. It's really hard to keep the
Yeah,
language clean.
yeah.
So we'll give you
So he did a lot of shit in Afghanistan, and he says that he's like, "Oh, well, they gave me medals of honor to cover up the fact that I did some awful things to people as a soldier." And I think that is an interesting conversation paralleling, what happened with Isaiah Bradley, except with Isaiah Bradley, because he's black. Again, viewers of the show, how race factors into this, is that Isaiah Bradley was not given medals of honor. He was imprisoned and mistreated, and all the crap that the system throws at black people because of systemic racism. So it's like, I don't understand how anybody, like you said, can walk away thinking that John Walker is a good, decent dude. Like, he is supposed to be the opposite of, if like Captain America is the ideal, within the MCU about like what a hero should look like or whatever, then they're purposefully making John Walker the complete opposite of Steve Rogers. So that in and of itself should tell you that he's not a good dude.
that.
I think what irritated me too is that I saw a lot of people chatting about, or I saw some bad takes rather on Twitter about how, they were blaming the Dora Milaje for coming after what's his face, Bucky and removing his arm as the failsafe. They're like, oh well, they helped him and they helped remove the words so that he could go on with his life and not have to be continue being brainwashed, basically. And what people fail to understand in this conversation too is that, first of all, Wakandans don't owe Bucky anything whatsoever. The fact that they took him in was a favor. And three, despite everything that he's trying to be a good person now, he was still a brainwashed guy who did some pretty awful things. So, and in this instance, he's protecting Zemo, who is a war criminal and who killed their previous king. So you can understand why they're not exactly going to be happy with what he's been doing. Like, they gave him time, went against them, done deal. So this the aggravation comes from like people focusing so much on their actions because fandom tends to want to protect their sad little white boys and comfort them and pet their heads because, oh my god, he's trying to be a better person, he's going to be redeemed, and all these conversations surrounding redemption. And I think people miss the point of the fact that yes, someone can try to continue, try to be a better person than they were, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a learning curve like Bucky has in this instance. Now he's trying to be his own man and he's trying to do the things that he never did before, which means do, he's not going to make all the right choices all the time. He's going to make mistakes. And
Yeah.
the fact that, they took off his arm wasn't a betrayal. And I feel like people focusing on that as if like Bucky didn't hasn't caused harm shifts the blame onto the black
Yeah.
people on the show and just makes the even like Zemo, who's so popular apparently online, like absolves them of their sins basically. And it's not, and you see that pattern over and over and over again with black characters that people like a black character breathes wrong, says against any white person, even if it's not even that big of a deal, it's just a small admonishment. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe they said that. This is the worst or the worst. They should leave the show, blah, 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 blah. And it's just so ridiculous because it's like the same pattern of excuses over and over and over. They're jumping through hoops to make say the same exact things that they said about several different black characters across several different shows. And it gets exhausting once you recognize what it is that they're doing and that it's passive aggressive racism. They don't even realize it. And it's what's annoying the most, like you said, that somebody points it out to them. And they just want to continue arguing with you instead of just being like, that was a bad take.
Yeah.
Of just acknowledging what it is that they said, they will just try to continue putting their foot in their mouth. And that's what's frustrating about these types of shows because, like you said, the racism is blatant. They've made that very clear. And it is continuously frustrating to have to watch. Like, I don't know what people want. Do they want them, sorry, let me rephrase it. Do they want the MCU just spoon feed them this content because they're already doing that. They need.
Yeah, they do.
I don't understand.
Honestly, like that was part of why I was like, if they're trying to make a point, they need to say it, because really that's the only way people are going. Even though they've been sort of saying it, but I'm like, it's like they have to throw in a line in there that blatantly calls out racism, or else people are not going to understand. And even though there was a whole conversation, like there were several really great conversations that are alluding to that point. Obviously, they introduced Isaiah's character for a reason. Like, and that whole conversation is about race. He's supposed to be a contrast of like what happens when you have a Black Captain America, what they do to him versus what they do when it's a white guy in there and that guy is glorified. And you know, that's also an example of like people who are like, well, who don't understand why Sam is so reluctant to take the shield. Look what happened to Isaiah. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
any
And
Black
oh, he's
person.
a black man, Becky. That's why he's reluctant to take the shield because he's gonna be defending a country that hates him.
Exactly. Any Black person would be reluctant to take up that mantle for very obvious, justifiable reasons in terms of how Black people are. His sister blatantly says that in her conversation with the girl, what's her name, from the Flag Smashers. Yeah. And she's like, you know, why would I care about this guy who's just a puppet for a country that hates me anyways? Like, you have that conversation with Sharon where they're talking about the hypocrisy of everything. What was that conversation about? What is the hypocrisy referring to? Come on, people. You have the conversation where Zumo is pointing out that the whole conversation about supremacy and how anyone who wants a super soldier serum is basically just somebody who wants supremacy, and who took the super soldier serum the second he had the opportunity to do so without any thought whatsoever to it, despite the fact that there were a bunch of other characters. Like, these other characters, Sam blatantly said that he would not take the super soldier serum. We have Zemo, who is the villain, who could have taken it himself when he had all those like things lying around. He could have stolen them for himself. He could have like went back on all the things that he supposedly says and been like, oh, you know, he could have been a stereotypical villain who just wants to be on a power trip, but he doesn't. Even as a villain, he actually has very specific ideals and whatever a purpose that he's trying to achieve, even if he does it, you know, through very awful means. But he is at least living up to what he is preaching, in that sense, not being hypocritical, because when he had a chance to take it, he decided to destroy all of the super soldier serums. So there's conversations are happening that are blatantly alluding to things that relate to racism, that relate to white supremacy. They didn't say the word white because they're referring to supremacy as a whole, because, you know, a person of color can still take the serum and have supremacist ideals and not be a white supremacist per se, but they use the word supremacy, and a white person took the supremacy file and injected it into himself. Like, how, like, the metaphors could not be more clear. And even in the end, when you have this crazy super soldier person beat a man to death in broad daylight in front of a crowd of people, and they have the symbolism of the blood on the shield and all this kind of stuff, again, very blatant, over the top symbolism. It's not particularly subtle. Even with that, there are people defending him murdering this guy in public, like, and they're like, oh well, he deserved to die. And
That's American exceptionalism.
like, I'm sorry, the number of people who said he deserved to die, he was a terrorist anyways, oh my god.
Doesn't that just speak to the general, you know, military industrial complex? Like,
Mm-hmm.
not even like, is John Walker authorized to do all this even? And I'm sure he is because the government
Yeah.
is behind him.
Which was a whole nother conversation, actually.
Yes.
That one was actually more of an interesting conversation,
Yeah.
because they don't make it particularly clear what any of these people are authorized to be doing. Not just John Walker, but literally every single character on this show. You really don't know what they're actually authorized to be doing or not.
They're just
And
all
they
operating on
kind
their
of,
own. It's like,
yeah, and you do kind of like they bring up authorization because John Walker says to the Dora Milaje when they come, he's like, you know, you're not authorized to be here, like this isn't your jurisdiction or whatever he says to them.
and that's funny too
He's
because
also like, no
he's
one
also
knows.
in another country. He's
Yeah,
not.
we're like, are you authorized to be there? I'm like, what,
Talk
as
about
far as
jurisdiction. It's
no.
okay for me.
Yeah, it's like
American
I'm white, so I can do whatever I want, but you don't have a right to be here. But people were more focused on the fact that the Dora Milaje were like, oh, we're authorized to be wherever the heck we want to be, essentially. And they're like, oh, okay, well, why is that okay? And it's like, why is this okay for anybody? Like, I agree that that's not okay for them either, but it's like all these white people walking around doing whatever the heck they want to do in whatever country they want to do it in. So really, you know, at least set an equal standard. If they can do it, why can't the Dora Milaje do it? And especially since the Dora Milaje are not there to do anything other than to bring in the person who was broken out of prison. So they're not there to be like fighting anybody or do it, like they're taking back their prisoner.
Mm.
So it's a little bit different than someone going to another country and starting fights and beating the shit out of people, and you're just like killing people in someone else's land is a whole different thing. But you know, those are valid arguments about jurisdiction, and that's something that I was thinking about throughout the show, even from the opening with Falcon working for the military in land that they're not supposed to be in or whatever. And I'm just like, why are all these people just walking around the globe doing whatever the heck they want to do without any authorizations and whatever? And apparently it's all good and well. But again, this all is how America works. Like, America does go to wherever and does whatever it wants all the time. So again, this is a commentary on things. And if people are not picking up on that too, it's like they are pointing these things out, and people are just choosing to see what they want to see. But it's like, it's the very comments people are making are literally the point of the show, because all the people who make those sort of comments are the John Walkers of America. And John Walker, you know, he represents a portion of the American population who really thinks and acts this way and believes that these are all justifiable things. And those are the people who, if you did give them a super soldier serum and a shield, would run around the world doing stuff like that. So the fact that, you know, there are people that justify it on the one hand is shocking, and on the other hand, it's like, oh, we're having, you know, blatant police shootings every day, so really it's not that shocking. But yeah, I'm just like, this guy literally murders a person in public, and people are like, well, I mean, but he was like mad because his best friend just died, and you know, like he needed vengeance and whatever. And then people have the audacity to try to compare that to, like, they're like, oh, well, how is the, like, different than other times where, specifically they were talking about Iron Man, when Iron Man found out that Bucky's parent killed his parents and he was trying to hurt Bucky. And they're like, oh, well, Iron Man killed people, tried to kill people too, or whatever. And previous Captain America also killed people. Anyways, all these things to try to, like, compare them to other characters and be like, oh, John Walker isn't actually that bad. And I am not someone who has ever defended Iron Man. I'm not a particular Iron Man fan. And I think there's a lot of problematic things about Iron Man, because Iron Man is actually another character who, similar to John Walker in that regard, is actually a representation of white privilege in a lot of ways. He's someone who was obscenely wealthy and powerful and got away with a lot of things he really shouldn't have gotten away with as a result.
War and all that stuff.
Yeah. So yes, both of them represent white privilege in different ways. The difference is that Iron Man wasn't an abhorrent human being overall. He had his moments where he was definitely an a-hole, and his you know, his ego got the best of him sometimes, and he said and did things that were not great. But on a deeper level, his motivations came from a good place. He wasn't someone who was, he was generally trying to do good and trying to help people. He just didn't always go about it the best way. This is, and same thing with like Captain America, like Steve Rogers always had the best intentions. I didn't always agree with his actions, but his motivations were always, his heart was always in the right place, regardless of what he chose to do or didn't choose to do. All of these like vengeance, like the argument that he was just so consumed by his anger that his friend died, and vengeance, that he was just like, of course, vengeance is not an excuse for being able to just murder people. And yes, we've seen other examples in the MCU where the other heroes were consumed by vengeance at different points. That's valid. That's a valid point, and I've usually been annoyed by all of those circumstances. But in almost every one of those circumstances, when it came down to the point of actually killing the person, they showed restraint. And there was, because at the end of the day, in their hearts, they were good people. So when it came down to it, they were able to show restraint. What's his name? Black Panther had more than one occasion where he was consumed momentarily by vengeance and anger. But every single time when it came down to it with the villain that he intended to kill, he never actually followed through with killing them. Every single time he showed restraint. Every single time he ends up showing humbleness and humility. And, with both like Zemo and Killmonger or whatever, he actually just ends up having a deep conversation with them. And gives them advice and a heart to heart. This is a person that he went out intending to kill. Like, that just shows you the heart of who he was at the end of the day. And, I have my doubts that Iron Man would have actually followed through with trying to kill. I think he wanted to hurt him. I don't know that he would have actually killed him. But like, at the end of the day, Iron Man had good intentions. Captain America had good intentions. This guy, we have no proof that this guy has any good intentions. Literally everything that he's done so far hasn't been in the service of anybody other than himself.
Yeah.
He has done nothing to help people. He has done nothing to save people. Literally, he's been running around chasing Sam and Bucky and treating them like crap the entire time.
It just often feels like he's trying to be the best one and he's on a power trip because he's in this position.
Yeah, every single time he does his motivations have been that he is trying to prove himself and to live up to this idea in his head of what Captain America should be. And he wants that respect of Captain America or whatever. Those are all selfish motivations that have literally nothing to do with helping people. So
his kill even was a metaphor. I mean, one could take it as a metaphor for cops in America, right? Like they'll make excuses to kill black people, and it's like, oh, well, they were a threat, so they had to go down. And in this instance, that's the case. Like, what he did doesn't justify, like his friend died, it doesn't justify him killing, like you said. That's just in poor taste.
Yeah, because the guy at that point was not a threat.
Yeah.
He was on the floor, he had surrendered. But yeah, regardless of how or why you are detaining somebody, once they've surrendered, there's no justification for killing them at that point. Once they are no longer a threat, there's no justification for killing them. That's not how America is supposed to operate, supposedly, based on the ideals America supposedly purports. But America does it all the time, like you said, whether it's cops or the military or whatever. We go around unjustifiably killing people all the time. But so yes, it is typical of America and a lot of people to find justifications for those actions. But the show is supposed to be showing why that's not cool. It's not supposed to be making you sympathize with him. That's literally not the point they're trying to make. So anyone who's making those points are just completely missing what the show is about. And instead they're seeing a show about white supremacy and going, yay! So
And that's sad at the end of the day because like art is supposed to help you analyze certain things or question certain things and ideologies and what you've been taught to some degree because there's nothing that is presented to you without a certain ideology in mind. And anybody who thinks so needs to reevaluate themselves. But in this instance, like it's trying to tell you something and you are like, you're here and the point is just flying right over your head. And it's really sad, especially when in the MCU, like something that is far reaching for people, it has a large audience, and the audience that it's being obviously written for is not absorbing the message whatsoever. So it's disheartening, you know?
yeah, it's like the people absorbing the message are the ones who already know, and it's like you're preaching
Right.
to
You're
the
like, I
choir.
already know this. But like the people that are supposed to learn new things, it feels like a
I
loss.
mean, it's like, how do you miss the symbolism of a guy standing there with blood on the shield that is literally the American flag? Like, again, not particularly subtle. It's literally America having blood on its hands. Like, literally, there's no other, and also the fact that it's a shield, which is like a representation of something that's not supposed to be a weapon at all. Actually, it's supposed to be a defense
Yeah.
uh,
But John Walker
mechanism.
uses a gun. So it's like he puts up, a front like the American flag and then goes off with his gun and like starts shooting people. And that is essentially a lot of America is, sadly.
But I think it can also be a representation of how, you know, using the shield to kill people, like it's America hides behind the defense um, rationale in order to justify murdering people. And so it's usually anytime we, again, military wise, cop wise, which the cops are part of the military complex, it's all the same thing. There's always the justification of it was in self defense. It was, that's always somehow what it turns into. And so it's like this thing that is supposed to be a defense, but you're actively using it as a murder weapon is what America does all the time. And then it's like, oh no, I was defending myself. So it's yeah, and also the fact that he wasn't actually even the one that killed the guy. So he was literally taking his anger out on someone who was just there but didn't actually do the murdering that he wanted vengeance for in the first place. So it's just, clearly they're showing him as a man who has no self-restraint and overblown temper and overblown ego and overblown superiority complex and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, it's pretty obvious. But again, there's always going to be people who miss it, and unfortunately it takes a show like this that has the potential to be a really good show, and its ability to showcase a lot of different things and make a lot of interesting social commentary and stuff like that. But they end up really not being able to make interesting social commentary at all because the conversations end up turning into this sort of trivial nonsense that is like, what is the point? What is the point if Marvel is going to make this show and not be able to have people recognize the messaging of it in a way that is actually useful? And Black people are not the ones that need to hear that message. So for us, it's not doing anything. It's like, okay. So if it's not going to reach the other audience, then honestly, I don't really know what the point of it is. So, but I mean, again, we'll see where this show goes. Clearly he's not going to stay as Captain America, so we'll see the fun jumping through hoops people are going to do to try to explain why they're going to need to take the shield away from this person and give it to someone else. See how you still manage to defend the guy. Then they'll find ways, and we'll see what those ways are. But it's just, you know, like I said, he was made to be sympathetic for all of like 5 minutes max before he started running his mouth and completely contradicting anything that could have given sympathy for him. So I don't know, like, honestly, even if he wasn't going around murdering people, he would still be despicable just by his tone of voice and how he talks to people. It's just, again, that whole point Zemo was making about the supremacist ideals, he clearly has them. So whether or not people want to label him as racist, which is not even a conversation I want to get into, is besides the point, because he's clearly a supremacist. So
Yeah.
and the fact that we even have to dance around calling people racist in this
Yeah.
country.
And it's so annoying because if people get mad about being called racist and actual racism, it's like I think you need to change the direction of your anger.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, again, it's an ego driven anger. And you know, John Walker is the epitome of walking ego. So it's like you said, yeah, people are more focused on not wanting to be insulted and not wanting to be, you know, white guilt is another element of that. It's because when you're that hurt by having something called out, it's because you deep down you know it's wrong. Otherwise you wouldn't get so defensive about it. But you know, I genuinely think that there's no way that on a deeper level, I mean, there's probably some people who are just straight up evil, and that's that's one thing. But most people, it's like on a deeper level, you know, it's effed up, and you don't want to admit it. Hence, the going out of your way to find reasons and excuses and whatever, because it's easier than just admitting that you might be at fault about something and having to reevaluate your entire worldview. So I don't even know what else to
Okay.
say, but
He'll leave it off, actually. So
yeah.
we'll be back with more Falcon and Winter Soldier conversations after the show is over. In the meantime, please like,
Or
subscribe.
maybe before then, we'll see where this goes. If we need to have more videos about something, we will talk about it. Hopefully our next video or videos will not need to be consumed entirely by needing to dissect basic race concepts, and we can actually focus on enjoying elements of this show. But again, who the heck knows with this country? We'll see. And until then, thank you guys for listening, watching. Write in the comments your thoughts, your opinions. If your thought or opinion boils down to defending racism, please don't put your thought or opinion. Just make that clear right now. But other than that, yes, hit us up in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe so that you can turn on the notification bell. That way you get notified every time we put up a new video, and you can find out what we continue to feel about this show and the multitude of other Marvel shows that I'm sure are coming. So stay tuned, and until next time, we will see you guys in the next video.
Bye.